Translation, Gospel according to Mark, chapter 13, verses 24 through 37. At that time, after the anguish of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will give no light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of heavens will be shaken. Then everyone will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with great power and glory. He will send out his angels to gather his chosen ones from all over the world, from the furthest ends of the earth and heaven. Now, learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things taking place, you know that his return is very near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will not pass from the scene before all these things take place. Heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. However, no one knows the day or hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows. Since you don't know when the time will come, be on guard. Stay alert. The coming of the Son of Man can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. When he left home, he gave each of his slaves instructions about the work they were to do, and he told the gatekeeper to keep watch for his return. You too must keep watch, for you do not know when the master of the household will return, in the evening, at midnight, before dawn or daybreak. Do not let him find you sleeping. When he arrives without warning, I say to you what I say to everyone. Watch for him.
Evan, I thank you very much. If you could pin me, I appreciate that. We are here in, of course, the sanctuary. The first candle of Advent has been lit. It is for us in Emmanuel this year representing peace. And when I think of peace, one of the things, of course, I think of is our Emmanuel community. I was caused to think of Emmanuel as the Corinthian reading was read, where Paul said how much he gave thanks for the existence of that community in Corinth. It caused me to think of Emmanuel. Rhonda, could you mute yourself because that noise has returned? Thank you. And we begin, of course, this season of Advent, and the focus is on peace. Many churches around the world are going to be focused now on the theme of keep awake and looking at Palestine and our journey to Bethlehem. We prepare for our journey to Bethlehem, and as we begin the journey today, I would like us to consider the views that we have of that peaceful place. The picture behind me, of course, could become from a Christmas card as we think about the peaceful, the quiet area of Bethlehem. But I'm afraid that that image isn't quite appropriate as we move toward Bethlehem today. And so I want us to place that in context. If you look at the map, you can see in red letters there, Jerusalem. And just to the side of that, after the M, is the location of Bethlehem. You'll see it's in an area on the map that is green. And down below it is another area, Gaza, that is green. And up above it to the north, well, you might have to move that group of people, is the area of the Golan Heights. That is Palestine, and it is separated from the rest of Israel. It's called the occupied territories. And so we move toward Bethlehem. But I want to stress how divided and separated the Palestinian area is, the occupied territories. But we're going to move toward Bethlehem. But as we approach it this time, there's a bit of a problem because there's a barrier. There's a great concrete wall. Indeed, each of those sections, Gaza, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights, are surrounded by walls. If we want to worship in Bethlehem today, this Christmas season, we have to go to a checkpoint and we have to be allowed in. And if you happen to be inside one of those areas and you want to go outside the area, you must go to a checkpoint and you must be approved for passage so that you can journey outward. Now, if we get to Bethlehem, we might find a Christmas greeting. It says, "Merry Christmas" from the Bethlehem ghetto. Not quite the vision that we had, is it? Indeed, it is very, very different than what we might have hoped for. The reality is that if you live within those sections, life is surrounded by a wall. If you work, it depends on where you work, whether or not you can get there. If you want to visit a relative, well, if they're in Gaza or if they're in the Golan Heights, you have to go through checkpoints, and then you have to travel through Israeli area and then go through another checkpoint to visit your family. If you want to go shopping, there's a bit of a problem because most shops are closed. People don't have work. Over 55% of people live below the poverty line. And you don't have power except for maybe 4 hours of the day, because down in the Golan Heights, where the generating plant is, the Israelis have stopped the import of diesel fuel. And so the generation of power can't happen on a regular basis. Can you imagine? Just think for a minute. If our area, if Rochester and the surrounding communities were surrounded by this huge concrete wall that you couldn't pass. If you tried to, you'd be shot. Can you imagine wanting to visit friends in the Finger Lakes or in Syracuse? But you can't. There's this wall separating you. It really is time to tear down such a wall, to tear it down. And the reality is that Israel is tearing down walls, just not that one. If you go into the West Bank, the land use program of Israel has approved about 1,200 new structures to be built. If those new structures are to be built, existing structures need to be torn down to make room. And very often, those structures to be torn down are housing developments. That housing development behind me that's being torn down, people live there. They're homeless now. Let me say that again. They're homeless now because their homes have been taken. If you're in the Golan Heights, there's a new housing development. It's called Rawat Trump. It means Trump Heights, because of the assistance that they received from that individual to open up that section for development, the encouragement that they received to do that. Tearing down walls. I can't imagine that happening. I can't imagine someone knocking on my door and saying, "Excuse me, but you all need to leave because we need your property now. We're going to build something different." If we journey to Bethlehem, this time, it's a different experience. The nativity happens inside a wall. I don't know if you noticed the graphic that Beth was using earlier. It showed the huge wall and Mary and Joseph approaching it. Can't get to Bethlehem. If the wise men want to approach, can't get to Bethlehem. Unless the shepherds are in the occupied zone, they can't get there either. No nativity, Certainly no nativity that we think of when we set up that beautiful display of the stable and Mary and Joseph, the lambs, the cow, the donkey, the shepherds, the wise men. Think of that this year as you set up the nativity set. Doesn't look that way. You'd have to build this big concrete barrier. It's a different experience. But we should know better. Walls should be torn down. And the walls of homes should not be torn down. Where people live should be protected and secure. There was a time when all cities were surrounded by walls. The purpose was to keep enemies out, those who might attack. But if those walls were breached, the enemy could get in. I do want to remind you that repairs of the breach originally didn't really have anything to do with building bridges. It had to do with repairing an opening in the wall that would let the enemy in. That's the repairs of the breach, keeping the enemies out. But what happens when the enemies are us? When the enemies are within the cities, within the communities, within the countryside? What happens if the enemy is attitude, is feelings about other people, is how we view the stranger, the outcast, someone from a different place? What happens if that is the perceived enemy and they're all around us, or we think they are? And so walls that create that kind of division between us must indeed be torn down. And we all should learn from that experience. It seems to me that there's this phrase from Scripture that says, do unto others what you would have them do unto you. It isn't, and I checked, it really isn't, do unto others what they have done to you. That's not it. No, it isn't do unto others as they have done to you. It's do unto others as you would have them do to you. Tisha B'Av is a sad celebration within the Jewish community. It focuses on the pain and the anguish when the spiritual home of Israel was torn down twice. The destruction of the temple happened 2 times. The last time was in 70 AD, 70 of the Common Era. 70, just about when the Gospel of Mark was written, that we heard as our gospel today. To watch and stay awake. To watch and stay awake. And so I find it ironic that the picture behind me is the destruction of the home, the spiritual home of Israel, being torn down. And so if we remember that, we should remember to not do to others, not inflict on others the pain that was experienced when that wall was torn down. A small portion of the wall around the Temple Mount is still there. It's called the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall, a wall of tears, remembering the experience of what does it mean to lose one's spiritual home? What does it mean to lose one's home? What anguish, what pain. We know the pain of just having our spiritual home damaged. All of us felt the grief of that. Imagine if it had been torn down. And so we come back to our sanctuary to contemplate our trip to Bethlehem and what Bethlehem is experiencing today and the absence of peace there. And I want to remind us of the absence of peace in all of the world and how that happens. Peace is kept at bay when people build walls between themselves and others. And peace is threatened and kept at bay when homes are torn down, families are separated, people are made homeless. And these things of walls and homes can be symbols of the walls and homes within ourselves and in each other. When we threaten an individual, We are threatening their safe place, themselves, their home, their spiritual center. And when we build the walls of division, we are influencing and affecting those around us, our neighbors, and those we don't see, those who others maybe have caused us to fear. It is a time of Advent, and the scripture today said, keep awake. That is a theme that many churches today have chosen to look at Bethlehem and the experience of Palestine, to keep awake. Now, I would point out to us that keeping awake and waiting doesn't have to do with sitting back and hoping and waiting for something to happen. And yet we know that peace can break out in unexpected ways. So to keep awake and wait for it means also to continually engage in the preparation for that awakening, that breaking out of peace, even as we don't know just when Jesus will arrive. The gospel lesson today made that point. No one knows the time or the hour. We don't know, but we are called to, in our waiting, to keep awake for it and to constantly point the way toward it. I really labored over the experience today of going to Gaza, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, to think of the experience of the Palestinians. Is that the topic to look at on this first glorious day of the Advent season? And yet it is. It is that world that the Christ child is born into it. At that time, where he was born was an occupied territory. It was occupied by the Roman legions. All life there was controlled, even the life in the temple. For the temple priest, the high priest, was selected and appointed and put into position by Rome. They controlled all life. How much money you had to spend discretionary in your life was controlled by the occupying empire. It is very much like Palestine today. The word becomes flesh. And as it happens, you and I are the flesh. You and I become the incarnation of Christ. And so we are called to stay awake, to seize every opportunity to birth peace where we are, to bring it about, to make it happen, to join God in God's history making. It is God who breaks into our world in unexpected times, in unexpected places. So I tell to you what I say to all: keep awake and be an agent of peace. Journey now in these days of preparation toward Bethlehem, where the need is great and the birth.
Thank you so much for your heartfelt words. And thank you so much for risking this intimacy and this difficult news. To keep awake is to keep our eyes open, even for the things that are unpleasant. And I want to thank you, Tom, for doing that. Last night, I was on a Zoom call here in Rochester, and we had a rabbi who was a part of our conversation. And the rabbi, whose name is Drora Settle, was talking about how unhappy she is with the whole settlement movement in Israel, Palestine, and how several 100,000 Jewish-only housing units and settlements have been set up on Palestinian territory. And she says it's heartbreaking for her to see that. So we are here because we expect the Prince of Peace to come. And we are here as members of a peace community that is not naive, that doesn't just simply hold up some sort of old fairy tale version of what Bethlehem is like, but looks at the reality of what is, but still expects the Prince of Peace to come. I got this nice note from Jen Lassard, who can't be here today, but she put this on her Facebook page. She said, for my birthday week, and instead of asking people to sacrifice their privacy for a Facebook donate button, I am featuring organizations that I donate to every day. Emmanuel Baptist Church is my home church, sponsoring my ordination path, and has overall given me a new life in ministry. They are a welcoming and affirming congregation, members of the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists. They are the church of my grandparents, my uncle. They are the church of people I love. I'm so thankful for Jen Lassard and for all the beautiful things that are being birthed here at Emmanuel, and for all of you. So this is our opportunity to think about giving an offering to continue the life of our church together. It's not as easy as it once was when we were face to face. We can't put money in an offering plate, but we can make donations through the website, emmanuelrochester.org. And if you want to write a check, you can send it directly to Jan St. Pierre, and people can provide her address for you. We have choices about what we can do with our resources. For some of us, we have fewer expenses in this lockdown than we had before, and we have more discretionary income. And it's fun to give money away, especially in times of crisis. And so I invite you to be a generous giver. Let us give thanks for these offerings. And we are so thankful to you, O God, for your generosity, for your boundless love to us, and for the example that you have and always set with the life of Christ. We thank you for the resources that you have given to us and the privilege that is ours to share them. And we ask that by your loving spirit, you will enable us and encourage us to be more and more generous and give with lavish joy the way you give to us. We offer this prayer now in the name of Jesus Christ, who has given us everything.
I want to express my gratitude for Rhonda.
I can't hear you, Tom.
Tom, the sound isn't working, unfortunately, Tom.
I think there might be something wrong with your headset, Tom.
I just said I wanted to thank very much Rhonda for selecting our next hymn. It seems most appropriate with a contemplation of the concept of peace and conversation about the birth of the Prince of Peace. Our next hymn is called Peace Child.
This hymn for Advent is by a hymn writer from New Zealand, Shirley Arena Murray. The hymn is called Peace Child.
Evan, could I ask you?